The Appalachian Mountains, a vast mountain range that stretches across the eastern coast of the United States, have been a central point for legends and mysterious stories for centuries. This region, known for its natural beauty and challenging trails, hides deep secrets that seem to defy human understanding. Among the most intriguing and frightening tales are accounts of UFO sightings, unexplained lights, and disappearances that have never been resolved. The history of UFO sightings in the Appalachian Mountains dates back decades. Reports of bright lights and unidentified flying objects have been made by local residents, hikers, and hunters. These lights, often described as spheres of light moving erratically, appear without warning and disappear as quickly as they come. Witnesses claim that these lights do not behave like conventional aircraft. They defy the laws of physics, changing direction abruptly and vanishing into the air, leaving behind a trail of mystery and awe. One of the most famous phenomena is the Brown Mountain Lights, located in the Blue Ridge Mountains, part of the Appalachian chain. These mysterious lights have been observed for over a century, with documented reports dating back to the 1910s. The lights appear as bright orbs floating over the mountain, visible from a long distance. Despite several scientific investigations, including studies by NASA, no one has been able to fully explain what these lights are. Hypotheses range from atmospheric refractions to geothermal activity, but the truth remains unknown. The unexplained disappearances along the Appalachian Trail, one of the world's most famous long-distance trails, are another mystery haunting the Appalachian Mountains. The trail, which spans over 3,500 kilometers, is the scene of several cases of people who simply vanished without a trace. In many of these cases, searches have been extensive and involved experienced rescue teams, but nothing has been found. No bodies, no belongings, no clues. These inexplicable disappearances fuel speculation that there is something in the Appalachians that goes beyond the natural, something we may never fully understand. Local residents tell stories of people who set out in search of adventure or who moved to the region drawn by the tranquility of the mountains, only to realize that the apparent calm hid something more sinister. There are many legends about the mountain people, elusive figures who supposedly inhabit the most remote parts of the Appalachians, living on the fringes of civilization, invisible to the outside world. Some believe that these beings, if they exist, may be connected in some way to the UFO sightings and disappearances. And then there are the darker reports, those whispered among the oldest residents, who speak of portals or vortices in certain areas of the Appalachians, places where reality seems to disintegrate, and where those who venture end up crossing into a place from which there is no return. For many, these stories are just myths and superstitions, but for others, especially those who have lost loved ones to the mysteries of the mountain, they are the only explanation that makes sense. What really happens in the Appalachian Mountains? Are these phenomena manifestations of something extraterrestrial? Or are they the result of natural forces that we still do not understand? We may never know the full truth. But what is certain is that the Appalachian Mountains continue to be a place where mystery, the inexplicable, and the supernatural intertwine, creating an aura of fascination and fear that endures over time. And as long as the lights continue to shine and people continue to disappear, the mystery of the Appalachian Mountains will remain an enigma that defies reason. Before we proceed with more revelations about the Appalachian Mountains, I would like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and click the like if you are enjoying the content. Your interaction is crucial for us to continue unveiling mysteries that challenge our reality. Don't forget to comment below from which city you are watching, to know how far our terrifying stories are reaching. Now, let's dive even deeper into this fascinating story. Report 1. That morning began like any other at my workshop, but there was something in the air I couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps a sense of anticipation, or an unease I couldn't shake off. Mount Appalach, as usual, was shrouded in thick fog, its silhouette stark against the cloudy sky. I've seen many days start like this, but on that particular day, something felt different. It was still early when I heard the sound of a troubled engine approaching. An old, weary car, struggling to keep moving, finally parked in front of my workshop. The engine coughed and died, letting out a final sigh of hot steam from under the hood. I went out to check, and as soon as I laid eyes on the family getting out of the car, I realized they were not like others who passed through here. The father was the first to step out. He had an air of determination, but his eyes betrayed a deep fatigue, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. The mother, on the other hand, had a calm and serene expression, the kind of peace that only comes from being at peace with one's decisions, no matter how perilous they may seem. Then there was the son, a young man in his 20s, with eyes that seemed to see beyond what was in front of him. There was something about his eyes that made me uncomfortable, as if he knew something that we, mere mortals, could never understand. When they started talking, what struck me was the intensity of their fascination with Mount Appalach. They were not there for a simple family trip, nor for just any adventure. They were in search of something that only the mountain could offer them, answers to questions that no one else seemed able to answer. "Have you heard of the lights?" the father asked while I lifted the hood of the car. "The lights that dance in the sky above the mountain, those that seem to defy logic and science." I nodded. Those who live in the area know the stories. The mysterious lights that appear without warning, moving in impossible patterns, leaving the few who have witnessed them with more questions than answers. But unlike the curious tourists who sometimes pass by, this family was not just interested in seeing the lights. They wanted to understand what they were. The mother then began to speak, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "We believe there is something more up there. Something ancient, maybe even sacred. These lights, they are not just atmospheric phenomena. They are signs, messages from something or someone trying to communicate with us." As I changed the flat tire and checked the dry radiator, I couldn't help but notice how all three seemed to share this deep belief. It wasn't a superficial curiosity. It was something that was rooted in them, almost like an unwavering faith. They were convinced that Mount Appalach held secrets, secrets that could change the way we see the world and our place in it. The son, who had been silent until then, approached me and began to speak softly, as if sharing a secret. "I've always felt I was supposed to come here. Since I was little, I've had dreams about these lights, about the mountain. I need to understand what they mean. I need to know where we come from, where we are going." There was an intensity in his gaze that made me shiver. He wasn't joking. For him, this trip was not just an adventure. It was a spiritual quest, a journey to discover hidden truths. As I worked on the car, they continued to talk about the stories they had read, the accounts of people who had seen the lights and, in some cases, were never the same again. There was a mix of fascination and fear in their words, as if they knew they were approaching something dangerous, yet irresistible. For them, Mount Appalach was not just a geological formation. It was a portal, a point of contact between our world and something beyond, something we might never dare to understand. When I finished the job, the mother thanked me with a calm smile, as if everything was going exactly as it should. The father shook my hand firmly, but it was the son who left me most concerned. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I think we're closer to the answers than ever before. Thank you for helping us get there." They got into the car, and as I watched the vehicle drive away, I felt a chill run down my spine that I couldn't explain. There was something in the mountains that day, something that seemed to be waiting for them. I wanted to tell them to leave, to give up this quest before it was too late, but I knew it would be futile. They were determined. The night fell quickly, as it always does here. The darkness in the mountains is different from any other. It's dense, impenetrable, as if it's alive. I stayed in my workshop, thoughts consuming my mind. I had heard many stories about Mount Appalach, but something about that family disturbed me deeply. They were not just toying with the unknown, they were diving headfirst into it, fearless of the consequences. Days passed, and the family never reappeared. No one heard from them. No news, no reports of their return. Just silence, an oppressive silence that settled over the area like a shadow. The authorities were notified, searches were conducted, but no trace was found. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them, without leaving a trace. Local residents, those who know the legends well, were not surprised. They say that Mount Appalach has its own secrets, its own guardians. Those who venture too close to the heart of the mountain, those who seek answers to questions that should not be asked, often do not return. And if they do return, they are never the same. I continue to work in my workshop, watching people pass by, some curious, some cautious, all in search of something. But every time a car stops, especially when I see young people or families fascinated by the stories of Mount Appalach, I remember that family. I remember the father's determined look, the mother's serenity, and above all, the intensity in the son's eyes. Mount Appalach remains there, unyielding, a silent sentinel of ancient secrets. The lights continue to appear to those who dare to look, dancing in the night sky, leaving more questions than answers. And I wonder, did they find what they were looking for? Or did they lose themselves in the depths of a mystery that we can't even begin to comprehend? Perhaps it is better that these questions remain unanswered, because there are things that perhaps we should not understand. Things that should remain in the shadows, guarded by the mountains, where the unknown reigns and danger lurks at every step. And so the story of Mount Appalach continues, a living mystery, waiting for the next brave or foolhardy soul to try to unravel it. But if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the mountain always has the last word, and that word is a secret that perhaps we should never attempt to hear. That morning began like any other in my workshop, but there was something in the air I couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps it was a sense of anticipation or an unease I couldn't shake off. Mount Appalach, as always, was shrouded in thick fog, its silhouette standing out against the cloudy sky. I've seen many days start like this, but on that particular day, something felt different. It was still early when I heard the sound of a problematic engine approaching. An old, tired car, struggling to keep moving, finally parked in front of my workshop. The engine coughed and died, releasing a last sigh of hot steam from the hood. I went out to check, and as soon as I laid eyes on the family that emerged from the car, I realized they were not like the others who passed by here. The father was the first to step out. He had an air of determination, but his eyes betrayed a deep fatigue, as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The mother, on the other hand, had a calm and serene expression, the kind of peace that only comes from being at peace with one's decisions, no matter how perilous they might seem. And then there was the son, a young man in his 20s, with eyes that seemed to see beyond what was in front of him. There was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable, as if he knew something that we, mere mortals, could never understand. When they started talking, what surprised me was the intensity of their fascination with Mount Appalach. They were not there for a simple family trip, nor for just any adventure. They were in search of something that only the mountain could offer them, answers to questions that no one else seemed able to answer. "Have you heard of the lights?" the father asked as I lifted the hood of the car. "The lights that dance in the sky, above the mountain, those that seem to defy logic and science." I nodded. Those who live in the region know the stories. The mysterious lights that appear without warning, moving in impossible patterns, leaving the few who have witnessed them with more questions than answers. But unlike the curious tourists who sometimes pass by here, this family was not just interested in seeing the lights. They wanted to understand what they were. The mother then began to speak, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "We believe there is something more up there. Something ancient, maybe even sacred. These lights, they're not just atmospheric phenomena. They are signs, messages from something or someone trying to communicate with us." As I changed the flat tire and checked the dry radiator, I couldn't help but notice how all three seemed to share this deep belief. It wasn't a superficial curiosity. It was something that was rooted in them, almost like an unwavering faith. They were convinced that Mount Appalach held secrets, secrets that could change the way we see the world and our place in it. The son, who had been silent until then, came closer to me and began to speak softly, as if sharing a secret. "I've always felt I was supposed to come here. Since I was little, I've dreamed of these lights, of the mountain. I need to understand what they mean. I need to know where we come from, where we are going." There was an intensity in his gaze that made me shiver. He wasn't joking. For him, this trip was not just an adventure. It was a spiritual quest, a journey to discover hidden truths. As I worked on the car, they continued to talk about the stories they had read, the accounts of people who had seen the lights and, in some cases, were never the same again. There was a mix of fascination and fear in their words, as if they knew they were approaching something dangerous, yet irresistible. For them, Mount Appalach was not just a geological formation. It was a portal, a point of contact between our world and something beyond, something we might never dare to understand. When I finished the job, the mother thanked me with a calm smile, as if everything was going exactly as it should. The father shook my hand firmly, but it was the son who left me most concerned. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I think we're closer to the answers than ever before. Thank you for helping us get there." They got into the car, and as I watched the vehicle drive away, I felt a chill run down my spine that I couldn't explain. There was something in the mountains that day, something that seemed to be waiting for them. I wanted to tell them to leave, to give up this quest before it was too late, but I knew it would be futile. They were determined. The night fell quickly, as it always does here. The darkness in the mountains is different from any other. It's dense, impenetrable, as if it's alive. I stayed in my workshop, thoughts consuming my mind. I had heard many stories about Mount Appalach, but something about that family disturbed me deeply. They were not just toying with the unknown, they were diving headfirst into it, fearless of the consequences. Days passed, and the family never reappeared. No one heard from them. No news, no reports of their return. Just silence, an oppressive silence that settled over the area like a shadow. The authorities were notified, searches were conducted, but no trace was found. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them, without leaving a trace. Local residents, those who know the legends well, were not surprised. They say that Mount Appalach has its own secrets, its own guardians. Those who venture too close to the heart of the mountain, those who seek answers to questions that should not be asked, often do not return. And if they do return, they are never the same. I continue to work in my workshop, watching people pass by, some curious, others cautious, all in search of something. But every time a car stops, especially when I see young people or families fascinated by the stories of Mount Appalach, I remember that family. I remember the father's determined look, the mother's serenity, and above all, the intensity in the son's eyes. Mount Appalach remains there, unyielding, a silent sentinel of ancient secrets. The lights continue to appear to those who dare to look, dancing in the night sky, leaving more questions than answers. And I wonder, did they find what they were looking for? Or did they lose themselves in the depths of a mystery that we can't even begin to comprehend? Perhaps it is better that these questions remain unanswered, because there are things that perhaps we should not understand. Things that should remain in the shadows, guarded by the mountains, where the unknown reigns and danger lurks at every step. And so the story of Mount Appalach continues, a living mystery, waiting for the next brave or foolhardy soul to try to unravel it. But if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the mountain always has the last word, and that word is a secret that perhaps we should never attempt to hear. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after what happened, I can no longer remain silent. My father was always an enigmatic figure in my life. He was a ufologist, one of the most respected in his field. Ever since I was a child, he would tell me stories about mysterious places, unexplainable sightings, and especially about Mount Appalach. That place held a particular fascination for him, something I couldn't understand at the time, but now it all makes sense. My father dedicated his life to uncovering the truth about phenomena that most people prefer to ignore. He always believed we were not alone in this universe, and that the answers to many of our questions were hidden in places like Mount Appalach. I remember how he spoke about the lights that appeared in those mountains, lights that moved in ways that defied any logical explanation. He detailed his interviews with witnesses, his recordings, the studies he conducted. Everything indicated that something far beyond our understanding was happening there. Then there was that last trip he made. He came back different. I had never seen my father so quiet, so introspective. It was as if he had seen something that deeply disturbed him. Always so talkative, he could barely look me in the eyes. He locked himself in his office for hours, days, emerging only to eat, and even then he spoke little. Before dying in an inexplicable car accident, he left me with some words I could never forget. "Some truths are too heavy to carry, Mike." I never fully understood what he meant until the day I decided to go to Mount Appalach myself. I needed to know what had left my father that way. I convinced some friends to go with me, pretending it was just a camping trip, but the truth was I was in search of the answers my father never gave me. We arrived at Mount Appalach in the late afternoon. The mountain seemed to be watching us, like a dormant giant. The atmosphere was heavy, oppressive. I knew my friends didn't feel the same. They were excited, ready for a night of campfire and ghost stories. But for me, the mountain had something more to offer, something I needed to understand. As night fell, the air grew colder, and a dense fog began to form. We were sitting around the campfire, laughing and telling jokes, when I first noticed them, the lights. Initially, they were just faint dots in the sky, but as time passed, they became more intense, closer. The lights began to move impossibly, swirling and crossing the sky in patterns that defied any logic. I was mesmerized, unable to look away. I tried to get my friends' attention, but my voice seemed stuck in my throat. When I finally looked around, I saw that everyone had passed out, as if something had sucked the life out of them in an instant. And then I felt it, a strange warmth enveloping my body, an energy that seemed to come from all directions. The lights were now directly above us, shining with an intensity that burned my eyes. Everything began to spin, the ground seemed to disappear under my feet. I tried to move but couldn't. I was pulled upwards, out of control over my own body. Everything went dark, and when I regained sight, I was in a different place, a place that shouldn't exist. I was lying on a cold metallic surface, surrounded by a soft light that seemed to have no source. Around me, indistinct shapes moved, tall, slender beings that radiated an overwhelming presence. They had no faces, but I knew they were watching me, studying me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt an odd calm, as if they were somehow reassuring me, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. They began to show things in my mind, visions of other worlds, technologies that did not belong to this planet. I was flooded with images and sounds, knowledge that seemed to be poured directly into my brain. It was terrifying and at the same time fascinating. I saw things I could never have imagined possible, but I couldn't fully comprehend them. It was like trying to remember a dream that fades as soon as you wake up. Then I felt an intense pain in my chest, as if something was being ripped out of me. The lights around me began to pulse violently, and the figures started to distance themselves, disappearing into the darkness. Suddenly, everything went dark again. When I woke up, I was lying outside the tent, in a sleeping bag I didn't remember grabbing. The morning chill cut through my skin, but what scared me more was the silence. Everything around was quiet, the birds, the wind, nothing moved. My friends were still passed out inside the tent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew something was terribly wrong. I went home without saying a word to anyone. What could I say? That I had been taken by beings of light, that I saw things the human mind shouldn't see? That whatever happened to my father on that mountain had now happened to me? I didn't know what to do, how to process what I had experienced. I spent weeks reliving every detail, every moment. But each time I tried to remember, the memories became more distant, more confused, as if my mind was trying to protect me from something. The only thing that remained clear was the feeling that I had been watched, studied, and that now something was different in me. Then one night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a voice. It wasn't an ordinary voice, it was my father's voice, echoing in my mind. "Mike, some truths are too heavy to carry." And then, everything made sense. My father knew. He knew what was on that mountain, and he knew that once you see, you're never the same. I am no longer the same. Since that night, I feel that something inside me has changed, something I can't explain. Sometimes I feel watched. Other times, I hear whispers I can't pinpoint the origin of. But the worst is the constant feeling that somewhere, those beings are still watching me, waiting for something. The mountain holds its secrets, secrets my father tried to protect me from, but now they are mine to bear. And the more I try to understand, the more I lose myself in this unfathomable mystery. Because in the end, maybe my father was right. Some truths are too heavy to carry. And now I carry this burden, a burden I can never share, because no one would believe. The only thing I know is that Mount Appalach is not just a mountain. It's a gateway to something beyond our understanding, something we should fear. And as long as I live, I will never return there. Because whatever is there, it already took my father, and it almost took me too. And I feel that if I return, this time, there will be no coming back. I am Katharina, And this is the story I've waited my entire life to tell, although I never knew how words could capture what truly happened. Since I can remember, I felt that I didn't belong to this planet. It was a feeling that went beyond mere social alienation. It was a deep, almost instinctive certainty that I was not like other people. My dreams have always been populated by images of strange lights in the sky, tall, slender figures that seemed to watch me from the darkness. And on some nights, these dreams became so real that I would wake up in panic, feeling the cold touch of something I couldn't see. The idea that I had been abducted was not just a conspiracy theory for me, it was a reality that haunted me. I often woke up in the middle of the night with vague memories of being taken, surrounded by beings who communicated incomprehensible things directly into my mind. I knew that somehow they were watching me, waiting for something. And then I heard about Mount Appalach. The stories that circulated about that place were exactly what I needed to confirm my suspicions. For years, I saved every penny I earned, scrimping like mad, always with a single goal: to make that trip. Mount Appalach seemed to call me, as if it knew I was destined to go there, to finally find the answers I had always sought. I convinced 4 friends to join me. They also shared my fascination with unexplained mysteries and spent hours watching the night sky, always in search of something beyond the stars. We were determined to discover what hid in that mountain. We set off on a cold autumn morning, the car filled with camping gear, cameras, and the nervousness only those who seek the unknown can understand. The road to Mount Appalach was not easy. It felt as if fate itself was trying to prevent us from reaching there. First, the car tire burst in the middle of nowhere, and there was no cell signal to ask for help. We spent hours trying to change the tire, and when we finally managed, one of my friends suddenly started feeling ill, as if an invisible force was draining his energy. We had to stop again so he could recover, and with each passing minute, I felt the mountain drawing closer to us, with a kind of grim anticipation. When we finally saw Mount Appalach, it was almost dark. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows that seemed to stretch out to welcome us. I could feel the electricity in the air, a subtle vibration that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The atmosphere was dense, charged with a mystery that only those present could perceive. We set up camp in silence. The mood of my friends clearly changed since our arrival. No one spoke much, but I could see in their eyes that they were beginning to understand that this trip was not just an ordinary adventure. It was something deeper, more dangerous. When night fell, an intense cold set in, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't let you forget where you are. The stars shone brightly in the sky, but there was something else up there, something that moved erratically, impossibly. Lights. Small at first, almost imperceptible, but as the night progressed, they grew stronger, closer. Lying in my sleeping bag, I tried to close my eyes, but the flashes of light invading the tent made my heart race. Each time I closed my eyes, it was as if I were transported back to those old dreams, the ones where I was taken somewhere far from here. But this time, it was different. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. That first night, I had a dream, or perhaps it wasn't a dream. I saw myself lying on a cold metallic surface, like a surgical table. Around me were the same slender figures I always saw in my dreams, but now they were clearer, more defined. They had a presence that was not human, and their eyes seemed to pierce through my soul. There was no pain, but I felt pressure behind my ear, a tingling that spread throughout my body. I woke up suddenly, gasping, my body covered in cold sweat. Outside, the night was darker than before, and my friends were still sleeping deeply. That's when I felt the pain behind my ear. With trembling fingers, I touched the spot and felt something that shouldn't have been there, a small bump, as if something had been inserted under the skin. Fear overwhelmed me, but at the same time, there was a strange calm, an acceptance that somehow I knew this would happen. On the second day, things started to get even stranger. The lights in the sky didn't disappear with the sunrise. They seemed to dance on the horizon, as if they were watching us, waiting for a moment only they knew. My friends, who were initially as excited as I was, were now nervous, restless. We all felt that something was about to happen, something that would change our lives forever. That night, the lights returned, but now they were so close we could feel their heat on our skin. It was as if we were surrounded by an invisible force, something that was holding us in place, preventing us from fleeing even if we wanted to. And then it happened. One of the lights descended from the sky, shining with an intensity that seemed to make time stop. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as the light enveloped us. I remember feeling my body float, as if I were being sucked upwards. My friends were beside me, but their expressions were of pure terror, their eyes wide in disbelief. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the mountain disappearing below us, as if we were being taken to somewhere very, very far away. I woke up on the third day, lying on the wet grass, far from the campsite. My friends were still sleeping, as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had changed. The pain behind my ear was unbearable, and when I touched it again, the bump was larger, more pronounced. I ran to the mirror we had brought and pulled my hair aside. What I saw left me paralyzed. A small scar, as if something had been implanted there. I knew what it was. I knew that somehow I had been marked chosen. Whatever was on Mount Appalach had found me, and now I carried a part of it with me. I couldn't tell my friends. How could I? They would never understand, never believe. So I kept this secret, as I've kept so many others throughout my life. We returned home the next day. What remained of our camp was destroyed, as if a storm had passed through there, although the sky was clear. None of us talked about what happened, but I knew they also felt that something was terribly wrong. Since then, I feel like I am being watched, as if something or someone is waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The mark behind my ear never disappeared. At first, I tried to ignore it, as if that could make what happened just a distant nightmare. But the constant pain, a sharp pang that sometimes turned into unbearable pressure, wouldn't let me forget. Some days, it was so intense that I could hardly think of anything else. It was as if something was trying to communicate, or maybe trying to get out. The nights were worse. The dreams came back with a force that kept me awake. I saw the lights again, the beings that took me, and I woke up with a feeling that I was being called back to Mount Appalach, as if something unfinished was waiting for me there. After weeks of trying to endure, I finally decided to see a doctor. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding crazy, but I needed answers. During the consultation, the doctor examined the area behind my ear carefully, his face growing more serious as the investigation progressed. He suggested doing an imaging test, something more detailed that could explain what was causing so much pain. The results of the test came quickly, but what they showed left the doctor perplexed. "Katharina," he said, with a tone that mixed curiosity and concern, "there is something implanted here." He pointed to the image on the screen, which showed a small object lodged deep at the base of my ear. "But what is this?" I asked, feeling panic rise within me. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. It seems to be a material we can't identify. And it's implanted in a way that, if we try to remove it, we might permanently compromise your hearing." The news left me stunned. Something or someone had placed that implant there, so deeply rooted that it now became a part of me. The idea that it was there, without my knowing when or why, was disturbing enough. But the fact that it couldn't be removed, that it was stuck with me forever, made everything even more terrifying. I left the doctor's office with a mix of emotions I could barely process. I felt a growing connection to the implant, as if it was keeping me linked to something I didn't fully understand. Each time I looked up at the sky, especially at night, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just paranoia. It was as if I knew deep in my soul that they were still there waiting. And the worst of all was the question that wouldn't leave me in peace. How long until they come to take me again? Because deep down, I knew that this story wasn't over. Mount Appalach had left its mark on me, a mark I now carried under my skin, a constant reminder that what happened on that mountain was real, and that somehow, I was still connected to that place. Sometimes, I wonder if I should never have gone to that mountain. Maybe if I had ignored the call, my life would have followed a different, safer path. But now, it's too late. The implant is there, a part of me, and I know that one day, I will have to return to Mount Appalach to find out what really happened. And this time, I'm not sure if I'll be able to return to tell the story. Because, deep down, I feel that the next time will be the last. Story 5. I am Theo, and this is the story. I've always been fascinated by the sky. While other kids were busy with toys and cartoons, I spent hours lying in the backyard, staring at the stars, wondering what might be out there. It wasn't long before my fascination with the skies turned into an obsession with UFOs. The idea that we are not alone in the universe always seemed more plausible to me than conventional explanations. I knew there was something more, something beyond our understanding. I studied ufology from a young age and eventually specialized in astrophysics. I wanted to understand the cosmos, but more than that, I wanted to unravel the mysteries that the stars hid. But life took its course. I married, had children, and for a while, I set aside my ambitions to focus on family. They were always my priority, and as much as the desire to explore the unknown still burned within me, I knew my responsibility was to them. But the flame never went out. So when the opportunity arose, I decided it was time to fulfill an old dream, a trip to Mount Appalach, the epicenter of countless UFO sighting reports. I knew my life would change after this trip. I always felt it. It was as if fate was pushing me toward that moment. The trip started strangely from the beginning. The flight was delayed several times, to the point of almost being canceled. I thought it might be a sign that I shouldn't go, but I decided to ignore it. When I finally arrived at Mount Appalach, something seemed off. The small town at the foot of the mountain had a peculiar energy. It was filled with backpackers and adventurers, but there was something in people's looks, a kind of restlessness, as if everyone was looking for something, or perhaps waiting for something they feared. Before climbing the mountain, I stopped at a diner to eat. The place was almost empty, except for a few customers who ate quietly. I ordered a simple dish and watched the town through the window. I noticed that everyone seemed alert to what was happening outside, as if they were waiting for something. The waitress, an older woman with a weary look, served my plate with a glance that chilled me. As she attended another customer, I heard her say softly, "Those who go, seldom come back." My hands began to sweat. She didn't seem to be joking. The food went down heavily, but I pressed on. I climbed the mountain with my heart pounding in my chest, each step taking me closer to the unknown. The sun began to set, and a thick fog enveloped the mountain, creating shadows that danced around me. I set up camp near a small stream, a place that seemed serene enough, but the silence was disturbing. There were no sounds of birds or insects, just the wind and my own racing heart. When night fell completely, the real terror began. As I lay in the tent, the sky lit up with lights that moved erratically, blinking and pulsing with supernatural intensity. My heart raced, and a mix of fear and excitement took over me. The lights began to approach, and soon I realized I was no longer alone. Something, or someone, was watching me. Suddenly, my body was paralyzed. I couldn't move or scream. The cold that took over me was unbearable, as if I were being enveloped by a cloak of ice. I tried to fight the sensation, but it was futile. Whatever it was now in control. I saw shadows moving on the periphery of my vision, tall, slender figures approaching my tent. With each step they took, I felt my strength being drained. I tried to focus on something, anything, but my vision began to blur. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was an unbearable heat behind my neck, as if something was being etched into my skin. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold ground, outside the tent. The night was still dark, but the lights had vanished. My limbs ached, and I tasted metal in my mouth. As I tried to stand, I noticed strange marks on the ground around the camp, as if something heavy had landed there. Then, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. I ran to the small mirror I had brought, and what I saw left me terrified. There was a mark, a circular scar, as if something had been implanted there. Desperate, I searched the camp for answers. That's when I saw more marks on the ground. Patterns that seemed to form a perfect circle around where I had been. It was as if something had completely enveloped me. I knew I had been marked, but I didn't know why. The following morning was a struggle to maintain sanity. I was physically exhausted and mentally shattered. I packed my things and descended the mountain as quickly as I could, not looking back. When I reached the town, I could barely enter the diner again. The same waitress looked at me with eyes that seemed to know exactly what had happened. She said nothing, but her look told me everything. I was just another who had been marked. I returned home, but I was never the same again. The nights are long, filled with nightmares and visions of the lights and the shadows that surrounded me that night. Sometimes, I feel the scar on my neck tingle, as if something is communicating with me. The fear that they will come back for me never disappeared. Now, every time I look at the sky, I know I am no longer alone. They are there, waiting. I know I was chosen, but for what? I still don't know. But the certainty that my life has changed forever, that I was marked by something beyond human comprehension, is something I carry with me every day. And the question that never leaves me is, what do they want from me? What else will they do when they come back? Because deep down, I know that night on Mount Appalach was not the end. It was just the beginning. And at any moment, they might return to finish what they started. Story 6. I'm John, and if you had met me a few years ago, you'd see me as a simple man, someone who only believed in what he could see, touch, and measure. I was always a skeptic. I scoffed at stories of UFOs, strange lights in the sky, and anything that seemed supernatural. For me, everything boiled down to rational explanations, until the day my life changed forever. I've always loved hunting. It was my escape, my moment of peace. The idea of being alone in the forest, armed only with my rifle and my experience, brought me immense pleasure. Mount Appalach was one of my favorite places. There was something primitive about those mountains, a connection with the earth that I couldn't find anywhere else. I didn't believe the stories people told about the place. To me, they were just legends created to scare tourists and deter the faint-hearted. One autumn morning, I grabbed my rifle, put on my heavy jacket, and set out early for a hunt. The air was crisp, the sky clear, perfect for a good hunt. I walked for hours, venturing further away from known trails, following deer tracks, and losing myself in the tranquility of nature. I was so focused on the hunt that I barely noticed when daylight began to fade and a dense fog began to form around me. The forest, which had been alive with the sound of rustling leaves and singing birds, became eerily silent. I stopped for a moment, trying to hear any sound that might indicate the presence of an animal, but there was nothing. The silence was so profound that I began to feel an increasing discomfort. Something was wrong, very wrong. I kept walking, trying to ignore the strange feeling settling in my chest. That's when I saw the first light. A bright sphere, floating a few meters off the ground, moving slowly among the trees. I was paralyzed. My skeptical mind began searching for a rational explanation. Perhaps it was someone with a flashlight, or some kind of light reflection I wasn't understanding. But the light didn't move like anything natural. It moved erratically, changing directions with a speed that defied any logic. I tried to approach it, thinking it might be some light trick or even a hallucination. But the closer I got, the more the light seemed to retreat, as if it were watching me, studying me. Fear began to take over, but I continued, stubborn and determined to find out what it was. Suddenly, the light stopped. It remained still for a few seconds, and then without warning, it shot into the sky, disappearing in an instant. I stood there, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. That's when I heard the sound. A low, constant hum that seemed to come from all directions. My heart raced. It felt as if the air around me was vibrating. Before I could react, I was engulfed by a light so intense it seemed to penetrate every fiber of my being. It wasn't just a blinding light, it was a force that seemed to be burning me from the inside out, as if it were tampering with my very essence. My muscles contracted violently, my rifle slipped from my trembling hands, falling to the ground with a dull thud. I was completely paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare I never imagined could be real. I tried to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat, smothered by the overwhelming pressure that enveloped me. The humming, which was previously just a distant sound, was now deafening, echoing inside my head like an electrical storm, vibrating in every cell of my body. The light around me began to pulse, stronger and faster, until all I could see was blinding white. And then suddenly, I felt myself being lifted off the ground, as if an invisible hand was raising me into the air. There was no one there, but I knew I was not alone. My mind was a chaos, a torrent of images and sounds that made no sense. I saw flashes of unknown places, alien landscapes that defied logic. I saw tall, slender figures, beings who watched me with expressionless, empty eyes, as if they were studying every thought of mine. Darkness took over, dense and impenetrable, a darkness that seemed to extend beyond time. I didn't know where I was, or what was happening. I lost all sense of everything: time, space, my own identity. I was trapped somewhere between the real and the unreal, floating in a void that seemed endless. When the light finally disappeared, it felt as if I had been thrown back into reality with brutal force. I was lying on the forest floor, shivering from the cold, completely disoriented. The sky above me was black, dotted with stars that seemed farther away than ever. I looked around, trying to understand where I was, and saw my rifle a few meters away. It was broken in half, as if it had been crushed by a force that no human could have applied. I tried to stand, but my legs were weak, almost useless. The pain at the base of my skull was unbearable, throbbing with every heartbeat. I reached up, feeling the warm, moist skin, and touched a fresh scar, something that hadn't been there before. It was a mark, deep and precise, as if something had been inserted into my flesh. Panic took over. I, the skeptical man who always laughed at stories of UFOs and unexplained phenomena, was now facing the impossible. It was no longer a matter of belief, it was a matter of survival. I stumbled through the forest, each step a painful effort to get away from that cursed place. The fog had thickened, enveloping, and every shadow seemed to have a life of its own. The hum still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of what had happened. But what terrified me the most was the feeling of being watched, followed by something I couldn't see but was always there, lurking. When I finally reached my car, I could hardly believe I had survived. My hand trembled so much I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I drove home in absolute silence, the radio off, the hum still reverberating in my ears. I was trying to process, trying to understand, but nothing made sense. The reality I knew had been ripped open, exposed, showing a dark side I never imagined existed. In the nights that followed, sleep became impossible. Each time I closed my eyes, I relived the light, the paralysis, the hum. I dreamed of the slender figures, their lifeless eyes fixed on me, their invisible hands meddling with my mind and body. The scar on my neck continued to ache, as if something was pulsing under the skin, something that shouldn't be there. I tried to tell the story to some friends, but no one believed me. They laughed, saying I had hallucinated, that it was all the result of exhaustion, perhaps from a fall I didn't remember. But I knew the truth. I knew that Mount Appalach had shown me something beyond human comprehension, something that had changed my life forever. Now, whenever I look at the sky, a chill runs down my spine. The feeling of being watched never leaves me. I, who once mocked such things, am now a man marked by something I can never explain. And the worst part is the feeling that it's not over. Somewhere, that light is still waiting for me, like a predator lurking, ready to finish what it started. I've never returned to Mount Appalach, and I doubt I'll ever have the courage to go back. The forest, which was once my refuge, has become a place of nightmares. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the darkness of night, I hear a faint hum, like a distant echo. And each time it happens, I know it's getting closer again. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I'm sure they will come back. And when they do, I don't know if I'll be able to escape again. Mount Appalach left its mark on me, and that is a mark that will never disappear. If you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have any supernatural experiences, don't keep them to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the unexplainable. Feed the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe together we can unravel these mysteries that linger like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always lurking, just a story away. And now, with night falling, who knows what shadows may emerge from the darkness to whisper yet another true tale of horror.